Welcome to the Secure Connections podcast, brought to you by IOTSA, the Internet of Things Security Services Association. I'm Brian Sherman, Content Director for IOTSA and host of our weekly podcast series. I hope everyone's prepared for today's special guest, a true cybersecurity guru and an all-around dynamo when it comes to discussing data protection measures. Bobby Kuzma, Practice Director for Security Assessment and Testing for the Herjavec Group, hope I said that right, Bobby, now, has graciously agreed to spend some time with us today, so I'm looking forward to the conversation. Welcome back to the Secure Connections podcast, Bobby.
Yep, thank you, Brian.
Good. Hey, it's been a while since you stopped by, so what have you been up to the last few months?
Oh, it's the usual thing, breaking things, traveling around, breaking more things, realizing that people are still clicking on random links and putting their passwords into sketchy-looking websites.
So you're telling me job security?
Unfortunately, yes. A lot of security assessments, we can pre-fill 90% of them before we actually do them. It's kind of disheartening.
Well, yeah, I've got the easier part. I just get to talk about it. You guys have to spend the late nights trying to figure this stuff out. So I'm not envious of you on that front. So since we last talked too, you have a newish role at the Herjavec Group. Can you tell us a little about what you're doing over there?
Sure. So I recently took over the security assessment practice. So we're out and about doing penetration tests, phishing assessments, physical security, actually out in the field doing the bad guy things to people to make sure that bad guys can't do them to people and their organizations and all that fun stuff. Real APT stuff. So our capabilities scale from your regular application and network pen tests all the way up to full scale. Hostile foreign power has a desire to get into your environment.
Gotcha. So you're doing global work too. This isn't just relegated to the U.S. or North America.
No, we're primarily focused in Canada, U.S., and the U.K., but our customers have a global footprint.
Very good. And I know one of the things everybody has, what is it like to work with that group? Because I know they're well respected and everybody has seen, especially your boss, out and about at various channel events. Good environment to work with? I know you're going to say yes because you don't want to say no, but...
It's a great environment. Robert surrounded himself by some of the smartest people in cybersecurity, and he's a really interesting individual just as a person. Plus, he truly loves cybersecurity as a field.
Gotcha. Well, I'm definitely not exaggerating when I say you may be one of the most in-tune experts on the cybersecurity landscape. And you can be, I know you're not necessarily humble about that, but what do you see as the biggest risk that MSP should be focusing on today?
Turn on your MFA for the love of everything holy. Passwords by themselves are the single biggest way into every network, and MSPs are being specifically targeted because they hold the keys to everyone practically. From an attacker standpoint, you hit the jackpot if you get into an MSP. So
why do you think people are reluctant to do it throughout? Is it just an ease issue, or is there some other issues behind the scenes?
Well, there's some deployment complexity involved with rolling out an MFA solution. You've got to, not all of the tooling necessarily supports it, although most MSP tooling does. Not all of the end user centric tooling supports MFA, but you've got your Office 365, which you can flip on Microsoft Authenticator. It takes a couple of minutes to roll out if you've configured it properly. There's not a huge hurdle there. There is some user resistance. But when you consider that humans really, really suck at passwords and they recycle them when given the chance, and most people will use a predictable password following a common pattern, and they will share it in other places, and other places tend to get hacked, and those passwords become common knowledge. And if I've got your email and you've used that email somewhere else and that somewhere else gets hacked and we can break that password, gee, now we've got your password for everywhere else that you've used that identifier for. So it becomes a trivial exercise. But now if you've got multi-factor authentication, now I've got to compromise a whole separate device in order to get into that account. That increases the complexity by an order of magnitude. It makes you not a soft target anymore. And it makes moving laterally, if I manage to get in once, just like getting in all over again. It makes the job of the attacker so much harder that it's not even worth the effort. So if I had to do one single thing to make the biggest security impact for an organization, it would be to get some kind of MFA solution. You can use Microsoft Authenticator. You could use something like Duo or YubiKey or Ping or Okta. There's hundreds of different ways that you could go about implementing it. Just do something, anything.
Gotcha. I think we emphasized that point. So let's shift gears a little bit. What innovative new cybersecurity threats? I'm seeing all these weird things coming out of the woodwork. It seems like daily anymore. But what innovative new cybersecurity threats have you been paying attention to that could become a big issue, especially in the business community in 2020?
So the thing that's the scariest to me is actually a combination of something old and something new. So the something old is the traditional business email compromise. Okay, so the please send, pay this invoice and wire it to X. But that in combination with the voice version of the deep fake technology. So if you can collect a decent sample of the voice print of someone, you can fake their voice. But the technology already exists to do it in not quite real time, very accurately with a small sample. But I figure within a year or so, it will have progressed enough that you can do it in near real time with a small sample at telephone quality. So the advice now being before you send money to someone, pick up the phone and verify it. Well,
That doesn't necessarily work anymore.
exactly.
Yeah. I was actually talking about that with phone authentication with Eric Rieger yesterday in a discussion, if you remember Eric, with Webbit, because I know they're trying to implement some solutions this week too for verification. Does this get around some of the verification things as well?
It can, and the procedural verification, in a lot of those cases, you're masquerading as a trusted party within the chain. A bookkeeper, an assistant authorizing a bookkeeper to make a payment, something along those lines. It's a very common scam in the real estate market where an attacker might compromise a broker and tell a person doing a real estate transaction a different account to wire escrow funds into, that sort of thing. That type, if you can get inside the other party's decision loop with false information, it becomes a lot harder to detect until it's too late to claw back funds. So that type of business email compromise is probably one of the highest return illegal activities with that, and it's one of the more lucrative cybersecurity threats. The credit card fraud is, the banks are getting really good at detecting that quickly. It's not necessarily worth the effort to compromise a large payment processor or merchant's network to collect the number of cards that are necessary to make that profitable. Those don't sell for a lot of money. You're talking $25 to a couple $100 per set of cardholder data. But you get 10, 20, 30, 40,000, even a couple $100,000 wired to you at a pop. That's worth a couple of days of effort to set up the scam. So that's what's going on there. Now, flipping the bits a little bit, ransomware is perennially profitable because people have crap passwords, they don't patch things, and they don't have good backups, so they pay the ransom. And once you pay the Dane Geld, you never get rid of the Dane.
Yeah.
With apologies to our brethren of a Danish persuasion. But it's true, it works, and that's why the business model functions. And they've got better customer service than some of our folks in the service provider community.
Yeah, you can call Judy and make sure your ransomware payment has been made and free up your. Yeah, it's scary, but at the same point, you have to admire the tenacity of these people, or I should say the balls of these people, to just build a business out of it. But not going away. It's lucrative. They're making a lot of money off of it. You can understand until people get smarter and stop doing it.
And there are providers that are offering ransomware as a service where they provide the framework and the infrastructure to do the ransomware attacks, and you just provide the payload. You deploy the payload, and they take care of all the back-end operations, and you just get your percentage.
Yeah.
It's innovative, morally repugnant, but innovative.
Yeah, I understand. So I would assume on the voice, the voice vulnerability issue would be a problem for business executives, but also for any decision makers, or those that have financial access to financial accounts within an organization, accountants, banks, other type of people. That would be something to keep an eye out for, or to be pitching a solution to try to overcome that.
Yeah, and it's the solution is actually like tech as old as time. It's a two-man rule. You have a separation of duties, and you have multiple sign-offs involved in the release of the funds. But one of the things that you always have a problem with in small businesses is they're not actually large enough to support having multiple people involved in those kind of sign-offs. So two-party checks have existed for practically since checks were invented, but that kind of multiple authentication system for that sign-off isn't necessarily implemented in a lot of organizations.
Yeah. The sad part is that most of the nonprofits that I sit on the board for, it is. We adhere to it pretty closely, including Boy Scouts and.
Yeah, well, it's
probably
part of
do it better than some businesses do.
Yeah, it's part of the governance.
Right.
So I personally have all of my banking stuff set up so that I've got an outgoing funds account that doesn't have any balance in it ever unless something's going out. And the primary funds account, it's set up so that outgoing transfers are disabled, and I have to physically haul my happy butt into the branch to authorize any kind of outgoing transfer.
Interesting. So maybe some of the businesses should be thinking about the way they have their finances set up in addition to the way they have their security layer set up.
It's an additional compensating control.
Yeah, something MSPs should know about, because maybe they can at least be having those discussions with.
Well, if you are a trusted
advisor,
partner of your customer, then that's part of the discussion that should come up in your QBRs. You're advising about the overall security posture of the organization, the overall risk management posture of the organization. That's part of it. And, no one wants to hear about, your MSP getting hit by this kind of thing. And, that's good advice. And, you certainly don't want to hear the snickers about the cobbler's kids not having shoes. So
that's for sure. So let's switch to a different topic too, and I know I'm seeing it. I'm going to try to stick with a lot of the current events. Mm-hmm. Hearing a lot of timely discussion about the coronavirus, as well as the resulting stock market drop issues, and being used for hooks for phishing schemes this week. These guys are getting so good at being timely with their attacks. Do MSPs need to step up their discussions, in your opinion, with their clients about these type of things, especially the end users, about keeping up their guard? It almost seems like TMZ type communications are being sent out in these phishing scams, and people are getting hooked by it very easily.
They absolutely do, because people are going to go for things that get an emotional rise. And, the oh my God, we've got a pandemic going on is going to get an emotional rise. And, we have, yes, coronavirus is a serious worldwide health issue. Yes, it is a problem. Yes, it's causing all kinds of disruption. The fact that it happened right as we have the normal logistics slump surrounding Chinese New Year, where basically China shuts down, and the ships aren't moving because there's nothing coming out of the factories for 2 weeks, and we have the stock market beginning to have a downward correction because the end of that normal and expected slump doesn't have any new material coming out of it. That whole back pressure that normally exists isn't there. That's creating an additional hype cycle on top of the, oh my God, we've got a plague going on. And you have we've got a just-in-time inventory system that heavily depends on things that are made in the primary area of the outbreak. But we also have a just-in-time inventory system where things that aren't made there are dependent on precursors that are only made in the area of impact. Like quite a few generic drugs that aren't made in China are dependent on precursors that are made in China.
Right.
So there's some strategic implications to all of that impact quite a few other things. And when you look at part of security is business continuity, and that business continuity aspect goes beyond what do you do with your employees to keep them from getting sick and keep them safe while they're traveling. It goes into how do we continue our ongoing operations. Well, how do we continue ongoing operations if we can't get the things to make the things that we need to run our businesses and run our society?
Right. Yeah, and it's, we've hit China, we've hit some other things too. So I think the key part of this is it's elevating the angst. Anything that elevates angst is a cyber criminal's dream. It
Yeah.
seems like these
And
days.
when you get an emotional reaction, the reptile brain kicks in and the forebrain shuts off, and it's a lot easier to manipulate direction of the reptile brain than the forebrain. So you can get a panic reaction and get people to do the things. You click on the link. Would you like to know more? A lot of those classic propaganda techniques work really well from a phishing standpoint in terms of mass mining that kind of information. And then add to the fact that you can get some really good targeted attacks, particularly against executives in this type of scenario, to be on the lookout for. You also have to worry more about attacks against mid-level staff from attackers that are masquerading as executives within an organization. See that a lot. We use that a lot when we're conducting social engineering assessments. When the big boss asks to do a thing, most people do it, and they may not notice the missing letter in the domain name.
Right. But they're getting better at that stuff, I think, is the scary part. Is, to your point earlier, is they've got customer service. I think they've got marketing people. They're studying who their perfect targets are more than ever now, rather than just doing these dumb blind, we're going to hit everybody with this type of campaign. They are targeting very specifically, much like you would do with a marketing campaign.
So if you look at the techniques that are used in account-based marketing, and you look at the techniques that are used for spear phishing or whaling, you'll find that there's a substantial overlap between the two disciplines.
I'm wondering if it wouldn't be a good idea for MSPs to be talking to the marketing people that work at their client sites and leveraging them to educate the other end users that are in the company too about.
Well, I wonder if there wouldn't necessarily be a kind of a wall thrown up there, but why would we want to tell people how to ignore our stuff? It works.
Exactly. Just use caution, though. I think it comes down to is the cyber criminals are doing the same things that, for example, our department does. So don't get caught in those hooks. Is if it looks, be suspicious of everything, honestly, in email. And now, to your point earlier, be suspicious of the phone calls you're getting. Not that we aren't already anyway, because 90% of mine are usually spam calls coming in today.
Only 90%?
All right, maybe it's my office phone is probably 95. My cell phone,
And, to that point, one of the really simple things that you can do with most inbound email systems is add a header to the thing that says, "This is an external email. Use caution," to it. That's really simple.
Yeah.
Make it like ugly and red and yellow and garish, something eye-searing. And it makes it a little bit harder for it to slip through. Then again, your help desk has sent you an encrypted voicemail fish. That tends to work still, even with that. So I don't know.
Yeah, there's no easy answers, are there? We just have to try to stay one step ahead and not make a single mistake, which is nearly impossible, which is why there's people like you to help with penetration testing and response.
It's not so much that you can't make a single mistake. It's that you need to layer your defenses so that if you do make a mistake, there's still several other layers that can conceivably catch the bad guy.
Yeah.
You need to have multiple failure points for the bad guy to be successful.
That's an excellent point. So, one other thing too, reports of the ultimate demise, I'm saying this of passwords. I saw one just this morning, an article on, getting rid of passwords are going away very quickly. Do you see apps, facial recognition, and other measures taking over in the SMB anytime soon?
So let me ask you something, Brian.
Sure.
If you're going to replace passwords with facial recognition or other biometrics, what happens if your biometrics are compromised? How do you revoke your biometrics?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering too.
Do you use a belt sander?
I've seen the movie Face Off.
Yeah.
You can do Face Off. They did that movie like 15 years ago. That's got to be current technology now.
Yeah, I mean, it makes for a great popcorn flick, but yeah. So
you're telling me there are some problems with facial recognition, and maybe some of where you get rid of one problem, you may pick up a different problem.
Correct. So I'm very leery of systems that promise to completely eliminate passwords. I am much more in favor of systems that combine passwords and evaluate things like, is a device that we know you generally have chained to your hip in your possession and nearby? Are you following your normal access patterns? Is, normal time coming from the same place, same devices, that kind of thing, to determine whether or not you're going to be prompt to re-authenticate. That kind of intelligent authentication, I think, is a much lower friction, higher grade of security solution to just either blindly forcing you through multiple authentications or relying on something that, if it's compromised, could be easily replicated and can't be revoked.
Yeah. I remember when I first got out of college, I worked for a Fortune 100 company. I won't say 500, Fortune 100 company. And we were using the tokens back in the 90s.
Oh, like the old secure ID tokens?
Yeah, and it's funny because we're kind of coming right back to that again these days with some of those technologies. And I thought, wow, it was nice that I had that early exposure to it. And it really wasn't that difficult. The big problem was the internet was slower than now, so it took a long time for them to work. But today it seems like that's not a bad way to go back, especially if you're dealing with large financial information, sensitive information.
Well, it's something that there's three ways to authenticate. There's something that like a password. There's something that you have, an ATM or debit card is something that you have. Theoretically, a certificate is something that you have, or something that you are, a biometric signature. Those can be combined in a number of different ways. So when you have push type authentication, like you can enable with most of the multi-factor authentication vendors. Duo is one of them. You can do it with the Microsoft Authenticator solution. Those are effectively something that you have because it turns your phone into the authentication endpoint. As long as you have got the device in your possession, you get the push, you hit yes, this is good. It's all happy making. That in concert with the other factors it makes a weighted decision as whether or not you're kosher or not, or it may decide that it wants to prompt you for the password, depending on the situation. It's gonna look at a bunch of different things and based on policy directives and whatnot. So you could have, for an executive user, example, someone who's got access to financial controls, it might be very stringent about wanting all of the things. If it's someone who's a lower level user without access to the crown jewels, it might be much more liberal about reauthentication. So it varies. There's a lot of different ways that you could go about doing that don't require carrying around something with a magical 6-digit changing thing. Although they have backup modes that do that too.
Yeah. So what you're saying is there's a lot of options today for
there are
any size business. I mean, from many of these can be applied in even some of the smallest SMBs.
Yeah, and some of those solutions are either available for free for small deployments, or they come with something you're already buying, or there's a lot of ways to get that deployed. So there really isn't a lot of valid excuses, I would say, for not having that basic protection. I mean, I would almost say that it's more valid than having good patch management hygiene, but I'd have to flip a coin on that.
Gotcha. So we've talked about multi-factor authentication. I can go back to end user training too. I think that's one of the critical things, obviously, for any business. But what else should MSPs be doing to lock down their own fortresses today?
Oh, so the basic hygiene stuff. Yeah, I can't emphasize patch management. Segmentation is the other big thing. We still see way too many networks where any device can see any other device. And once you get in somewhere, having that kind of full visibility it's disheartening. If you've adequately segmented your network, and this isn't just for the MSPs, but also push that into your client architectures, that makes the attacker's job so much harder because it limits where you can go and what you can touch, and it really restricts the options that are available for making those lateral movements.
Gotcha. One of the things too that, and I know we have some peripheral discussions about this, but it's most people, most MSPs, I don't blame them, would probably not say we're not doing this enough, is penetration testing. They'll do it, but I get the feeling it's like once a year is still fairly common.
Yeah.
Or even less.
So here's the thing. A lot of organizations don't have the basics well enough in hand to get value from having that kind of testing performed. If you're not consistently patching, if you don't have your basic controls in place, you don't have MFA, you don't have your even your basic password policies well in hand, you don't know what's on your network to begin with, you don't have ACLs in place, it's going to be kind of like inviting a tiger into a kindergarten after it hasn't eaten in a week.
Those are the obvious things that they should be taking care of before they go to this level.
Correct. Yeah. So you're going to come back with a report that's got like 400 criticals on it, and you're going to go, what do I do? And it doesn't that's not going to help you level up. Okay, that's just going to be a slap in the face, and the executive summary is going to be basically like, do these basic things and step, and then come back and do the thing. Once you're at a maturity level where you've got those basic practices in place, then is the time to start doing that adversarial process. Because that will really help you level up. And it's not just that testing side. You also want to use that pen testing to help assess your detection and response capability, because a bad guy is going to get in if they've got enough patience and resources. The question is, how quickly can you actually detect them and boot them out?
Gotcha. Yeah, the one thing I'm encouraged by is it seems like every month when I go and talk to others like our advisory board members, our MSP community that we're working with to develop resources at IOTSA, more and more of them either have a CISO, especially the larger ones. I've had two that have just hired CISOs recently. So they've got somebody in charge. And even those that aren't are assigning and providing the right time or enough time for someone on site to be responsible for this, as opposed to just whoever has time to try to take care of some of the things. They're becoming much more purposeful about their internal security, and I think they have to, but it is encouraging. I don't know what you're
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when you have a dedicated and responsible party whose job it is to ensure the overall, not just information security, but the overall security, whether it's part of the risk organization or it's part of the technology organization, that's going to bring solid results. And that in turn, when they have those good practices at home, that's going to help them promote that within their customers.
Right. Makes perfect sense. Well, unfortunately, we're getting we're close to time here. So before we go, any final thoughts you'd like to leave? We're hoping you come back again soon, but any final thoughts you'd like to leave with today as far as the current structure or just anything you'd like to ramble on about, Bobby?
Don't invite me to ramble on because I'll keep going.
All right, I won't go that way.
You gotta focus on the fundamentals. That's the biggest thing, and I still see too many MSPs, especially in the online fora, get laser focused on tools and the whiz bang features on the tools, and they forget about the basics on the patch hygiene, the basic security controls. And if you got to crawl before you walk, you got to walk before you can run. And if you have that solid foundation, then life's going to be a lot easier.
Gotcha. I'm still stuck on whiz bang. Next thing you're going to be telling me no malarkey.
What can I say?
Awesome. Well, on behalf of IOTSA, I'd like to thank today's guest, Bobby Kuzma from the Herjavec Group, for joining me today. Herjavec. I'm going to get this right eventually, I promise. Be sure to stop back every Wednesday for the latest episode of the Secure Connections podcast, and check out the latest cybersecurity solutions on our vendor partner page at iotsa.com. Have a safe and very profitable week. Thank you for joining us.